Language is not only the words, phrases, sounds, and structures of a peculiar culture or nation. Language is more of an embodiment of a nation's beliefs, thoughts, history, experiences, and power. Thus, the impact of language can be great or minor depending on how people perceive a certain language. For example, the English standardized language has evolved to become the global language in terms of power, education, sciences, and businesses. And this powerful presentation of language parallels the predominant power of the English speaking people who perceive themselves as superior to other less civilized and inferior nations. An idea that was born with the birth of the age of imperialism when the white people, the English, perceived colonialism as a sacred duty given to them by God to enlighten the uncivilized nations in Africa and Asia. The white people perceived themselves as the sophisticated and enlightened people whose language must dominate to facilitate the path to save the ill-fated nations from darkness. Therefore, the standardized English language grew to become invincible in its forms, structure, diction, and style that people become convinced that speaking other languages render them less valued and appreciated as they won't be able to elevate their level by using their mother tongue, whether it's a vernacular English or any other language. The impact of the changes brought upon the growing power of languages is evident in the people's tendency to abandon their own languages which parallel their identity and adopt a powerful language that eventually leads to a total termination of not only the individual's mother tongue but also their identity, history, and nationalism. Rudyard Kipling, an internationally famous poet of imperialism who witnessed the US colonization in the Philippines island, published his poem The White Man's Burden that reflects that the impact of language in bringing about a drastic change in the evolvement of nations, creation of new ideologies, and the marginalizing of other nations. In his poem, Kipling masters the use of language in the peculiar diction, phrases, structure, parallelism, and metaphors to convey the idea that colonizing other nations is a burden on the white people, the chosen race whose duty is to help the subaltern rise in the world to take a prominent place in it. Had not the white people been assigned this duty, the struggling nations would have fallen into darkness. This view proposes that white people consequently have an obligation to rule over and encourage the cultural development of people from other ethnic and cultural backgrounds until they can take their place in the world by fully adopting Western ways. The term the white man's burden can be interpreted simply as racist or taken as a metaphor for a condescending view of non-Western national culture and economic traditions. Identified as a sense of Eurocentrism, European ascendancy, which had been called cultural imperialism, or in other words, hegemony. In the opening lines of his poem, Kipling states clearly that the white men would bear a great responsibility and an honor of serving their captives, who would enjoy the blessings of having the white men as their saviors, who will transform them from mere beasts into sophisticated beings. According to Kipling, this will be fulfilled through the power of speech, the power of language, as he said in his poem, open speech and simple, which can work as a magical potion in turning the colonized people into obedient followers who will consequently ditch their language and adopt the language of enlightenment, the white man's language. During the 19th century, for example, when the Europeans colonized the African countries, they used the missionaries to facilitate their job by first teaching the colonized nations the white man language, and second by using the language as a vehicle to assist them fulfill their goal of raising doubts about the Africans' beliefs, customs, and religious notions. This couldn't have been fulfilled without the reliance on the white man's language. In Nigeria, when the British intended to colonize the country, the missionaries worked hard on starting schools that teach English language, and then they targeted the outcasts, the Usu, and the mothers of the twins who used to be buried in the evil forest as embodiments of the evil spirit. The white man won the support of those Nigerians, the Igbo minorities, by showing them how Christianity was the merciful religion and the fair one that accepted all people as equals and rejected all superstitious beliefs. This parallels Kipling's idea as evident in his personification to veil the threat of terror. As once people find salvation for their misery, they will value the English domination. Consequently, those weak minorities will abandon their own beliefs that deprive them of the basic human rights. This couldn't have come to reality hadn't it been for the dominance of the English language, the open speech and simple, as Kipling referred to in his poem. Thus, Kipling adopted a very encouraging tone, established through his repetition of the phrase, "Take up the white man's burden," at the beginning of each stanza, to highlight the role of the language in the hierarchization of nations and in the promotion of colonialism as an act of enlightenment. Added to this, Kipling alludes to the fact that the white man's approach in enforcing its power on the colonized nations should be through cunning ways that promote the goodness of the white people, such as feeding the hungry mouths, ending famines, and curing diseases. As this is demonstrated through Kipling's personification, fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. This idea parallels Hook's, an African-American author, feminist and social activist, presentation of the standardized English language. As in her Language and Power article, she points out the fact that the standardized English has become predominant because of the positive effects linked to it as the most accurate mean of expression, the language of instruction and writing, and so any other form of language will fail in the art of expression globally and in all domains. Thus, just like the people of the colonies who are brought into likeness by the power of the white man, certain languages like the standardized English has accomplished a high status that led to the diminishing of other languages. Thus, any trial to retreat to the individual's mother tongue will be an indignant act of reciprocating the favor, as Kipling referred to it in his poem, and reap his old reward, the blame of those you better, the hate of those you guard, the cry of host you humor, ask lowly to wear the light. Why brought he us from bondage? In here, the term light symbolizes civilization, and night and bondage refers to savagery. Added to this, in her article, Hook relates to a similar idea of how the white students reacted when she applied the vernacular English as the language of instruction. The students reacted negatively and couldn't cope with the vernacular English, which wasn't sophisticated enough to be used in the educational domain. Even when Hook started writing her stories and books with the vernacular English, the editors used to edit them using the standardized language. As for them, the vernacular English can never succeed in the art of literature in terms of effectiveness and meaning. To conclude, Kipling's implicit message about the superiority of the white people parallels the predominant notion of the superiority of some languages, as reflected by Philipson, who is an expert in linguistic imperialism and who believes that language is hierarchized. By this, he means that some languages are widely used in others because of the values and attributes correlated with them. So no one can deny that there is a linguistic power that impacts drastic changes on not only on other languages, but also on the history and culture of other nations that have strived to be enlightened or be part of the globalized advanced world.